A brotherhood broken. Floyd Shivambu resigns from the EFF and defects to the MK party. Is this a crisis moment for the EFF or the beginning of a political realignment in South Africa's politics from the opposition to the coalition? Let's find out. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, the Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh experience. If you're new around here on this channel, we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. And this is our first ever live stream. We've been preparing over the weeks to be able to do this. And wow, what a time to go live for the first time ever on SMWX. Thank you for joining us. Comment in the live stream down below. Send us a super chat if you can. We're still working on that functionality, but let us know if that's possible as well. And let's just hope that Eskom and City Power help us to stay live throughout this analysis. So, amidst all that's happening in South African politics today, there's only one place to start and only one thing to discuss, and that is Floyd Shivambu's switch from the EFF announced today to the MK party. I want to take a look at what Shivambu said in that press conference, so let's turn to that right now.
I've decided not to renew the membership of the EFF because I will join and participate in Umkhonto Wesizwe party. I am not going to speak here in Winmadikizela Mandela House as to what is the basis of that, because that will be tantamount to campaigning already for Umkhonto Wesizwe party. So I'm going to be actively involved in Umkhonto Wesizwe party and shape its direction and the politics that are obtaining today in South Africa. So that is to end the uncertainty or speculations that have been obtaining in terms of what is going to happen.
So that was a bombshell, if there ever was one, in South African politics. The rumor mill was going crazy from the morning. And Floyd Shivambu announced two big things. There was speculation he would announce he was leaving the EFF, which he did. But he also announced that he's joining the MK party, and that's big news. Let's take a look at Julius Malema's reaction to what Floyd Shivambu had to say now.
When he sent me a letter yesterday, I felt the same pain when I received the news of the passing away of my mother. Because Floyd, to me, is not just a comrade, he's a brother. And he will remain a brother even when he pursues his political career differently. We formed this organization together, and I've told him that resigning from the EFF is equal to resigning from himself, because this is his organization. The constitution of the EFF does not allow people to resign and join other political parties and come back to the party. But I've made this offer to Floyd that the day you decide to come back, you are more than welcome.
Wow. Big news. Big news today. And in this episode, I want to reflect on a number of things. First, I want to talk about the press conference and what this means, firstly, for the political alliance between Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu. This is an alliance that has been with South African politics for many, many years and has never broken. So just to reflect on that, firstly. Secondly, we'll look at what this means and whether this represents some kind of move towards a consolidation of the opposition outside the GNU, and whether the EFF and MK party may end up in some kind of merger in the future. Also going to talk about VBS, because of course that's been a key question and a key headline recently, and whether that had anything to do with this. And then the GNU itself and the coalition and how it will respond to this move in opposition politics. Shout out to all of you, over 1,000 people watching right now, which is quite incredible. Thank you to all of you, and make sure to comment, share this, and let's get the stream out there. Cool. So let's take a first look at the brotherhood between Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu and what this means. Just in terms of the press conference today, I have firstly never seen Floyd Shivambu looking nervous, but clearly he appreciated the gravity of his statements. And you could see that when he was reading it, there were some nerves, just because he appreciated that this was a big moment in his life, in the life of South African politics, and of course in the life of the EFF. Julius Malema looked, at the beginning, firstly, quite angry. But you can just see from a personal perspective that this is a really serious moment for both of these two leaders. But when Malema spoke, I also noticed a tone of sadness. And it's funny because I've seen Malema in many different emotions, but I've never seen him sad. And you could sense a tone of sadness in his voice, a tone of dejection, a tone of disappointment. And I'm sure all of those emotions are flowing as we speak. So what was also interesting from what Shivambu said was that he's not taking up a position in the MK party. I'm sure he eventually will. I'm sure we'll see him in parliament, and that, he's not just doing this to become an ordinary member, but there's no position yet lined up. So I think that's one thing to watch. What we also heard, of course, is that other members of the EFF will be leaving. We've heard about Mzwanele Manyi. Others have been rumored to leave. So I think it's important to keep an eye out for who those might be, who they might not be. I might be reading too much into this. My producer was laughing because I said this to him. But when I looked at the press conference, I saw that there was one side of people wearing black and another side of people wearing red. So I don't know if the people who are wearing black on the one side are going to leave and the people wearing red are loyal to the EFF, but maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But I think there will be an important period of change within the EFF and shifts to MK. We've already seen defections from the EFF to MK already, but now senior leadership are involved. But really, this is a question in some ways about a broken bond or a broken political bond between Malema and Shivambu. Now, I actually interviewed Floyd Shivambu on this channel, and it's fascinating to go back to it now, and I want to play you a quick clip of that interview, because I asked Floyd Shivambu what it is that he admired about Julius Malema's leadership and what he had learned from Julius Malema. And this is what he had to say. What kind of personal lessons have you learned that maybe we wouldn't have seen?
Oh, yeah. So what actually defines the president of the EFF now is the fact that he does not surrender political principle on the altar of political convenience. He is very consistent. Once a position is taken, he sticks to that position. It doesn't matter who says what. It doesn't matter who tries to lobby him on the side. On policy positions, he's very consistent. So you can actually check, even prior to him being in the mainstream leadership of the ANC Youth League, the people that he got to associate with, the people that he believed in, his demand for free education, and led huge protests here in Johannesburg on behalf of causes that time on free education, on a variety of progressive policy positions. And he does not tiptoe around elders on the basis that, no, we must just worship, praise the elder political leaders. He speaks with consistency, with clarity on policy positions. And that is what should define all leaders in terms of what is expected.
So that's an interesting perspective. Clearly, the two go a long way back. And in that interview, he talks about their whole political history from the Youth League all the way to Malema's expulsion from the ANC and Shivambu deciding to follow him, even though he was given a gateway back into the ANC after some time. He left, and the formation of the EFF, first election, second election, and now we come out of the 2024 election. You know, when I thought of these two leaders, I've often thought of Thomas Sankara and Blaise Compaoré, who was the second in command to Sankara, of course the Burkina Faso leader, who led important revolutionary movements within Burkina Faso, what was then Upper Volta. And this is actually where the red beret idea comes from. You'll see in an image of the two of them that this was the political movement that actually started the Red Berets. And the EFF has always drawn inspiration from Sankara and this movement. And Sankara and Compaoré, who are both there, led this revolution together. But unfortunately, their political friendship broke up. There it was much more dramatic and violent because Compaoré ended up with staging a coup against Sankara's government, and then it ended up becoming the president of Burkina Faso up until 2014, until he was deposed by a mass movement because he became a long-standing dictator. But I've always thought of these two and that story of how the original Sankara movement had this division between the top two. And I'd always worry if the EFF had a split between those two, because really their unity has been the story of EFF unity. There have been many attempts to drive a wedge between those two, and they have always been able to present a front of unity. And today we see for the first time the end of that story. Now, let's hope it's not a story of the same amount of betrayal as the Burkina Faso situation. But for some reason, that analogy came to mind today, without wanting to say that anyone is betraying the other, just the breaking up of a political brotherhood. So this is a big moment for the EFF. It's a big moment for South Africa as well. And shout out to all of you. 2,000 people watching right now. This is crazy. Is this SMWX or SABC? Who knows? So the key questions for the EFF for me are, does this mean that the personal relationship between Malema and Shivambu is at threat? Even, of course, in public, they will say they're brothers and nothing will come between them. But to what extent will that personal relationship be broken? And what would that mean for both the EFF and MK party? But beneath that, I think there are questions in the EFF about what this means for the leadership succession within the party. There has never been a question about Malema at the top and Shivambu being his number two. Even in the build-up to this leadership conference, all the talk was about possible contestation in the SG position, but not so much in the deputy presidency position. And I thought it was interesting that it was also announced at the press conference that the EFF will not fill this vacancy now. They're going to their National People's Assembly, which is the equivalent of their big 5-yearly conference where they're going to elect their leadership. So they're going to keep that open and vacant for now. Now, that decision means, firstly, that Malema's power within the party will be even further consolidated, because effectively he will now be the president and the deputy president at the same time before the party goes to its conference. But it also means that speculation will run all the way up until that conference about who the deputy president will be, and we may see a true and a fierce contest for that position. Of course, you've got possible successors and also possible people who would leave. Let's look at the EFF's top leadership. You've got Marshall Dlamini, who's the Secretary General. You've got Veronica Mente, who's the chairperson. So one would naturally look there first and think, okay, those are the two most senior positions. There were rumors that Mente would defect to MK, so if that happens, then you've got to ask who's staying over. If she doesn't, then she would obviously be one of the key contenders. You've also got a figure like Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, who is not in the top leadership structure right now, but of course played an important role in the election campaign, especially in Gauteng, has been a very vocal voice in parliament and attracted a lot of attention with his interventions there. So where would he fit? And then would there be people from outside coming into those positions? Of course, you've got a slightly younger crop of leaders in Vuyani Pambo, in Sinawo Tambo as well, who may be eyeing this conference to rise further up within the leadership. You've got Ompile Maotwe as well. So that's going to be an interesting question. And in some ways, that shows the maturation of the EFF. No longer is it a set piece where we know who the leaders are going to be, but now, for the first time, the EFF, as it grows older, is going to be a party where there's serious contestation. Maybe not right at the top, but certainly at the deputy level. So there's that question. There's also now a question after succession about how will this EFF conference go, because there's going to be a lot more uncertainty. Of course, the party itself has come through a bruising time. Firstly, they'll be very disappointed that they weren't able to grow electorally. I don't think it's true that they bled support or that they lost a huge amount of support. They went from I think they lost about 1.3 percentage points. So that's been a bit overblown. But they were really wanting to grow and get to that 15 mark. And so that was a big blow and a big knock. Following that, the VBS scandal reignites with Chifiwa Matodzi's blockbuster affidavit. And of course, that puts the party again on the back foot because it doesn't look good for the EFF. Meanwhile, the GNU is moving. Meanwhile, they're isolated from the governing coalition. So it's clear it's been a tough time for the EFF, and maybe that pressure has been behind this internal breaking point. So what will happen at the conference? And the EFF will really have to, in some ways, actually remake itself at this conference and set itself again on a more stable trajectory. But we'll come to some of the VBS stuff and other things a bit later. I want to move now and turn attention to a different question. I've seen a lot of speculation on social media as well about this, and I think we do need to ask this question. Is this a true break from the EFF? Or is this a move towards consolidating opposition to the ANC and creating a new political entity that may be born out of the MK and EFF and maybe elements of the ANC that could rise to potentially become the biggest party in South Africa? Because here's the thing. Clearly, the EFF and the MK are in some ways fishing in the same pond for voters. And clearly, the EFF is strong in some places, like Gauteng. The Free State, it did reasonably well and it was one of the few places where it grew. Has a footprint in the Northwest. Clearly, the MK is strong in places like KZN, in places like Mpumalanga. And clearly, there has been a cross-pollination of experience between the two parties. We know that Malema has met with former President Zuma, and he said that actually before the MK party was formed, Malema said he spoke to Zuma in an attempt to try and get Zuma to join the EFF. We know people like Carl Niehaus, like Mzwanele Manyi, have been fierce allies and supporters of former President Jacob Zuma, and they joined the EFF. So there has been this recent cross-pollination of experiences and human capital. There is a similar message, although it's not exactly the same because there are sharp ideological differences between the EFF and MK. So is this, in fact, the start of a deeper realignment in opposition politics in South Africa, where we may see the EFF and the MK merging closer and closer together to create a super party out of the two parties, which draws on the strengths of both and minimizes the weaknesses of both, and merges the institutional capacity but also the resources of both. Now, I asked for some of your comments on social media when I announced I was doing this episode, and here I want to talk about Mazibuko, good to see you. Thanks for the comment. He said the two must merge. Siba Ntloko said, quite a surprising departure, that's Floyd Shivambu's, but this may be part of a bigger plan by the Progressive Caucus. The world of politics in SA has changed, and we will get shockers more frequently. So clearly people are thinking about this and whether this represents the start of a merger between the two of these parties, right? Now, I want to go a step further than that and talk about how I wouldn't just be looking at the EFF and MK in this scenario, but if there's going to be a true realignment of South African politics and forces that at least describe themselves on the left of the ANC and have historically been on the radical side of the ANC alliance, if those forces are going to coalesce, then we would also have to consider something like the South African Communist Party. And I've been paying very close attention to the comments of a person like Solly Mapaila, General Secretary there, who's been extremely critical of the ANC and its decision to join forces with the Democratic Alliance. And further, isn't this interesting now? He has spoken about how he had meetings with Floyd Shivambu when we were getting the coalition negotiations to basically say, hey, can we bring the ANC and the EFF then closer together? He has also said, yes, the MK party is an irritation, and they have reserved quite strong words of criticism and condemnation for the MK, but they have said they are not our strategic enemy. So what I would also be looking out for right now is not just EFF and MK coming closer together. And Malema himself, even in this press conference, said, we don't have a problem with MK. He did not come out to attack MK. So I'd look at EFF, MK, the SACP. I would then look at elements of COSATU. Not necessarily all of COSATU, because I think some of COSATU is loyal to the so-called GNU project, the governing coalition project, but some elements of COSATU are very angry with this alliance of capital, as they call it. And so what you could see, and then further, there are elements of the ANC itself which could break away outside of that alliance, elements of the ANC that are very unhappy with this ANC-DA merger. So one scenario that we need to bear in mind here is if the EFF and MK can patch up their differences and convince certain elements of the existing ANC, they could then build a bloc right on the left of South African politics, which would be a serious challenger in the 2029 election. And I mean serious in terms of potentially even becoming the biggest party in South Africa. Because look at this, right? The ANC is currently at 39.7. Let's call it 40. The DA is at 21 or so, right? But the EFF plus MK is at 24, right? So let's call that 25, right? Let's say the DA and some of its partners are also 25, right? So we have an EFF and MK on the one hand, and we have the DA on another hand. And if this EFF-MK bloc is able to coalesce, it can command as much as 25 right now. Now, we know the MK party is growing and can probably grow a lot further than the first 6 months that it had in politics. So just organically, those two parties could grow, a few percentage points to even just 5% over 5 years, for example, conservatively, which would take them to 30. And that growth would probably come to some extent at the expense of the ANC, which would bring it down to 35. But then, if that bloc was able to shave off parts of the ANC and merge them into itself, then you're starting to talk about almost an equal size of those two different players, right? Now, of course, there's many a slip twixt cup and lip, as they say. There are many things that could go wrong in between, but clearly there's a pathway for some kind of consolidated bloc which would stop the fragmentation of opposition to the ANC. And if it was able to break away other parts of the ANC, you look at Panyaza Lesufi's Gauteng ANC and how they're also not happy about this GNU thing. You could then see something that would almost be equal in size to the ANC, maybe mid-30s, right, in the best case scenario for that bloc. So I would be paying very close attention to whether we are going to see some kind of realignment like that over the next 5 years, particularly as President Cyril Ramaphosa's term in the ANC comes to an end. And there will then be questions about what will the soul of the ANC look like. Will it look more like the GNU soul, or will it look more like the anti-GNU soul? And if the ANC goes the GNU direction, then I think you could see a defection towards this bloc after 2027. So it's getting serious and it's getting real in South African politics. However, get this. I think there will also be an effort on the side of the DA, let's call it the more right bloc, to also shave off parts of the ANC as we build up to 2029 and try to reconsolidate around maybe even a new formation there. So what you could see is that the ANC will be being squeezed from both sides, from the left and from the right, and parties will be trying to break chunks off of the party from both sides. Now, of course, because the ANC still remains the biggest player in town, the ANC might be able to ward off both of those points of pressure and cast itself as still the dominant center of South African politics. But it will be tough because they will face this pressure from both sides. But that's what the ANC needs to watch out for. Because if the DA takes 5% and EFF and MK take 5%, the ANC will no longer be in a position to even say it's the biggest party in South Africa in one of those scenarios. However, at the same time, I'm not so sure that we can jump to that conclusion yet, because if that was really the idea behind all this, that Floyd Shivambu goes and then the EFF merges with MK, it would have been done in a different way. There are much better ways to do it than to do it like this, where there's this break between the two top leaders of the EFF and clearly both look really rattled by this decision. You would have held a press conference with the EFF and MK, and you'd have brought Zuma and Malema together, and you'd have said, hey, we're coming together. Like, this thing is happening, and get ready, right? But for Floyd Shivambu to leave and defect and say that he's basically taking a whole chunk of the EFF party with him tells me that there is some kind of acrimonious element to this, that there was some kind of fight, some kind of division, some kind of issue which led to a break. Now, that break may well, ease itself over time, because there are just too many connections between MK and the EFF for a break like that to be permanent. So what I'm suggesting may happen is something over time, but it looks like it's going to be more of an potentially organic movement. And one should be alive to the fact that there really are breaks and divisions between and within these parties that were on display today. I don't think this was all a pantomime scene and pretense. I think there really was a break and a fundamental rupture within the EFF today. But I think that rupture will be healed over time through the pure political incentives of where the EFF and the MK find themselves. And in many ways, they've been driven together by the other political coalition parties. So I suspect they will find each other more and more over time. There's also a question about whether the MK itself can remain internally incoherent. So there's a lot happening, but hopefully that will give you a certain insight. Remember, I'm speaking right now, right after this press conference, into what could or may happen. Just on a totally different note, but related, political something. This is a political something. Jacob Zuma's Shakespearean revenge. Remember Pay Back the Money? Remember Zupta must fall. Remember how the EFF humiliated Jacob Zuma out of office when he was president. He has now turned around and broken the top structure of the EFF and taken one of its most prized assets in Floyd Shivambu. Yeah, hey, the game of politics. South Africa, you can never predict what will happen. And former President Jacob Zuma has made one of his famous chess moves once again. You know, this is just a deeper view of how this election was really big for South African politics. And we're still feeling the shock waves of this election, which are going to ripple for many, many years. There was almost an eerie calm after the election where everything kind of went silent. But I think we are going to see massive changes on both sides of the GNU divide after this election. The coalition divide, to be more accurate. Cool. One other tweet from Packer gives us a different perspective, and it says, political suicide, in my opinion. The MK party is Zuma's party, so he's effectively, that's Shivambu joining without Zuma. MKP has no relevance. And that is an important question. But actually, reflecting on that tweet, Zuma knows he doesn't have a lot of time, politically speaking, left. And it's clear that he's been trying to build another layer of MK leadership by bringing in people like Dr. John Hlophe, by bringing in this new raft of MPs into the party, and now by bringing in Shivambu. So there's clearly a longer-term strategy to create an MK party above and outside Jacob Zuma. Let me turn to a different issue now, and that's the question of VBS. VBS is clearly a headache and has been for a long time for the EFF. I did an hour-long video on VBS where I analyzed this and said as much. And of course, Floyd Shivambu has been at the center of the VBS EFF allegations. And that was really what Chifiwa Matodzi, who was the centerpiece of the VBS conspiracy, that's really what he said in his affidavit, that there was a plan to effectively siphon money from VBS into accounts that were linked to Floyd Shivambu, and then to make it seem as though those were on the basis of a consulting contract where in actual fact it was a donation to the EFF or the lifestyle of Shivambu and other EFF leaders, including Julius Malema. So while aspersions have also been cast over Malema, the VBS allegations have mainly centered around Shivambu. And so I ask myself, in some ways, does this also free the EFF up from that, to the extent that the VBS thing is now also going to have to be owned by MK party, and that is going to muddy the waters between what was clearly something that was designed to be about an attack line specifically on the EFF. And the VBS thing now becomes even more controversial now and complex. But Malema was asked whether there is some kind of upcoming VBS charge that precipitated all of this, and he was quick to deny that, to say that he doesn't know anything about the trial, which is ongoing. We were in court just yesterday. And so who knows? But it's clear that you cannot separate the VBS story from Shivambu, and now there will be a slightly different link because Shivambu will no longer be an active EFF leader. So I just wanted to cast some light on that story because the angle of VBS also now changes. And of course, we're going to see a very acrimonious political trial, which is playing out and is still now in the early stages. But that trial will certainly hear testimony from people who will talk about, to some extent, even though it's a relatively small amount of the overall 2.2 billion VBS situation, we will hear things about the EFF and Floyd Shivambu. But he'll no longer be an EFF member at the time. Cool. Another thing to think about, and thank you so much to all of you who are on the stream. It's amazing how many people are here, nearly 4,000 people now. like, share, subscribe, drop a super chat if you can. Share this into your WhatsApp group. Let's all have a live conversation right now. Let's think about this from the perspective of the coalition, the ANC and the DA as well. Things are going well for this coalition to this extent that it feels like the opposition is still trying to find its feet and find itself. Ever since the so-called GNU, which is not a GNU, came together, the MK party has been going through a lot of internal turnover. And I know they're quick to allay people's fears and say that, this is normal, but it's not a great look that there's this constant turnover in MK leadership, right? Now we have the EFF coming from the VBS situation, going into this Malema Shivambu breakup. Really, what should have happened is that the opposition should have been putting pressure on the GNU at this time, and forcing the coalition to explain itself, to show, what its plans are, and to draw a contrast between this coalition and the opposition, and to say that if South Africa was governed by this coalition, life would be better for these reasons. But it hasn't been able to get onto that ground because of the internal instabilities and debates that have been going on. So it has really given the coalition, the governing coalition, parties like the ANC and the DA, a lot of room to work outside of real political pressure, because quite frankly, their allies are in internal crisis. So in many ways, I think when the coalition government was most vulnerable, opposition parties weren't there to capitalize on that vulnerability. But I think in some ways that belies how vulnerable this coalition really is. And at some point, opposition parties are going to find their voice and find themselves. And I'm very interested to see what happens when that happens, because this coalition government will make mistakes. We haven't seen too many major scandals yet, but it's a matter of time. And opposition parties now are going to have to really set themselves up to be in a position to capitalize on that. I think Action SA, funnily enough, has probably been the most nimble opposition party right now in setting itself up. It set itself up in Joburg. It's making itself a useful opposition. But as for the EFF and MK, there's still a lot of internal fighting, and that's preventing them from really getting onto the ground they need to be getting onto, which is playing their role as opposition. But I suspect this is the start of a much deeper realignment in South African politics, which will take the form of both opposition realignment and coalition realignment, ANC-DA realignment as well. And we've seen signs of this with the ANC and DA not always agreeing and being eye to eye, but just going to the brink of those disagreements and then stepping back from that brink. There is a question as to how long this coalition government can last and how well it will serve the parties up until 2026. But we've spoken a lot about that already, so check out some of our other videos. The other question is, did the GNU and the EFF deciding not to be in the GNU, and we're going to roll a clip here soon, did that not have a role in the disagreements within the EFF? I want you to take a look at this interview that I did with Floyd Shivambu and have a look at what he said on the position of the EFF on whether the ANC should be removed from power or whether the EFF should align with the ANC. Take a look at this.
Our first option is that all opposition parties must consolidate an agenda to remove the ANC from power. And if that does not happen, we have decided as the EFF that we are going to start participating in national government next year. We are ready to form part of government. And if the only option to constitute government will have to talk with the ANC or to the ANC, one of the non-negotiable conditionalities is that we can't have Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of South Africa.
So that's going to be one of your conditions.
And if the ANC is going to take the attitude of Cyril Ramaphosa or nothing, they're going to get nothing.
So there you can see that the EFF's initial position was that the ANC should be completely removed from power. But I think that they got a bit of a curveball when the DA decided to declare them, the EFF, enemy number one. And then the route of creating an opposition coalition and ejecting the ANC from power was effectively foreclosed by the DA itself. And then clearly there would have been a debate in the party about, okay, given that the DA doesn't want anything to do with us, do we partner with the ANC and go into government with them? And even worse, do we go into a so-called GNU arrangement where we would have to play ball with the DA? And it seems that there was disagreement within the party. Surely there would have been debate about, do we go in or do we not? And remember, these are big decisions because it's, do I become a minister or do I not become a minister? Or does the EFF get access to state power or does it not? And I remember in those final days, just before the coalition and the cabinet was announced, the EFF came out with an interesting letter where it basically stepped back from most of its demands and said, you know, we're willing to join, but we just don't want the DA and the Freedom Front Plus to be part of this. I wonder to what extent, and we'll have to see and unpack this over time, but the decision not to join the GNU has become or the coalition government, as it's more accurately called, not really, I wonder if that was not one of the key flashpoints behind this. And whether, in fact, the EFF could have done more to convince the ANC that they were the right opposition party to partner with instead of the DA. What happened in those negotiations? What kind of things were decided? I recall Malema, for example, first said he wanted Shivambu to be finance minister, but straight after the election results, he said he stepped away from that. And I wonder if Shivambu felt that he was in some ways abandoned by that decision of not pushing for him to have a greater role in the finance ministry, which he has long wanted to play a role in, and where a lot of his experience and the role he plays in parliament has been centered. So there's that. Look, this is a breaking story. I'm literally live freestyling this episode with you mere hours after this has happened. What are your thoughts? Comment down below. Let me say this. 4,000 people watching. Honestly, I know the numbers, so this is bigger than most live news channels in South Africa. Thank you so much for helping us. This is our first ever live stream, and you are all making history for this channel in that you are the first ever live audience. I want to thank you for that. This is a story of how comrades can go from confidants to competitors. And I think the story of Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu is far from over. This drama has taken on a new chapter. I suspect it's a chapter that will be at the center of South African politics for a long time. In this episode, we have tried to analyze that for you as quickly as we can and give you some insight into what could be happening. I want to know your thoughts. Comment down below, comment in the live chat. If you're watching this after the live chat, comment down below in the comments. Let's try and make sense of this. Now, a few requests I have from you. Number one, if you are not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button right now. Our next milestone is 150,000 subscribers. Number two, please share this video to whoever you think would benefit from these insights, whether they agree or disagree. And number three, I want to thank you for spending your time and your effort and your data watching this live stream. You are now, if this is your first time here, an official member of the SMWX family. And if you've been around for a long time, it's wonderful to have you back on this channel. We're continuing to grow and try to innovate, and this live stream is part of that. So thank you for being part of this journey and this community. Shout out to my team at Narrate Studio who have helped me with this live stream. Best in the business. And shout out to all of you. I look forward to further live streams in the future. Aye.